Greetings and welcome to the Man Cave Meals podcast. This podcast will take you on a journey into the world of barbecue, grilling, and outdoor cooking. Here at the Man Cave, fire is my favorite source of heat and smoke is my seasoning of choice. If I can't cook it outside on my Man Cave party deck, I'm probably not interested in cooking it at all. Join me weekly as we have conversations about different ideas on outdoor cooking. We might talk about a recipe, a cooking method, specific cuts of meat, or the equipment used to manage those cooks. The possibilities are endless. The video version of this podcast streams live every Thursday night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time from the Man Cave Meals Facebook page and YouTube channel. Follow me on one or both of those locations to get alerts on the live stream as well as other content that I publish each week. And now, let's get to this week's episode. Good evening. Happy Thursday. Welcome back to my Man Cave. It's that time of week once again. And Brother Jeff, how are you?
Doing good.
Sunny Florida treating you well?
Sunny Florida. Let's call it blistering Florida.
Oh boy, it's hot down there. Is it summertime's coming?
Well, it's it was 97 today when it feels like 100. Yeah. So yeah.
Man, we've had a rainy, cloudy week here, but I think it may be behind us now. It cleared up this afternoon, so maybe I'm going to get my grass cut that's about 1.5 feet high tomorrow if all goes well. So
either that or buy a goat, one of the two.
Yeah. My grass, it needed cutting earlier in the week, but it's kind of been rainy and wet all week. So here we are. We got some of our regulars joining us on the live stream tonight. Hank and Ryan, Mike, Darvin and Pat, Carl, Boder. Yeah, we're going to talk about ribs tonight. This, guys, is Jeff's idea. I was telling Jeff earlier in the week, I said, I don't know what we're going to talk about Thursday night. I said, maybe we can talk about cooking steaks. And Jeff says, let's talk about ribs. So it's going to be ribs tonight. Ribs are as good as anything. That's a good topic. And the more I thought about it, Jeff, I'm trying to convince myself that ribs might be, in terms of the barbecue, the low and slow barbecue stuff, I think ribs might be the second easiest thing to do.
Yeah.
Next to a pork butt.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's hard to mess up a pork butt. Let's be real.
Ribs, I love ribs. I love all kinds of ribs. I love the pork spares with or without the St. Louis cut. And Jeff and I, if you've been following us for a while, you know we love these baby backs. I haven't bought a regular rack of pork spares in a really long time.
Me either.
I've been cooking baby backs. And then there's the beef ribs, which come in various formats. I don't buy the beef back ribs because every time I see those, there's way more bone than meat, and I'm not interested in that. But in the beef rib realm, I like the beef chuck short ribs and the beef chuck plate ribs. Mm-hmm. Both of those are really excellent, and I'm a huge fan of the beef ribs. That, in terms of barbecue, is my favorite item. It's my favorite part of the cow. If I could have my choice of anything I wanted from anywhere on the cow, I think the beef ribs currently are my thing. That's what I like. You can have your ribeye. You can have your prime ribs. Let me have a beef rib.
You can even have your fillets. I'll still take beef rib.
Yeah. So I'm a fan. And I was thinking today about some topics maybe that we could discuss about ribs. And there's a lot to talk about when it comes to ribs. So we got, I think maybe a good place to start would be prep, because in terms of prep and in terms of cooking, pretty much let's talk about pork ribs and then talk about beef ribs, because I treat my beef ribs a little differently than I do pork ribs. But pork spare ribs and a St. Louis cut and baby back ribs for me are pretty much the same. I use the same method all the time, and there are a lot of methods, and I want to talk about a couple of different methods. So where should we start, Jeff? You want to talk about baby backs? Are baby backs more popular than pork spare ribs?
I don't know that they are. I don't know that they are. When you look online and you look at what people are cooking in the way of pork spare ribs, I think it's mainly either the full rack or the St. Louis racks. I think are being cooked more than the baby backs. And I only think the reason behind that is you look at the size and the price of a full rack versus the size and the price of baby back, they think they're getting a better deal.
But baby backs, aren't baby backs a little more per pound than pork spares?
Yep, that's what I'm saying. When you look at the size of the rack of ribs and the price, the baby backs are more expensive. And I think that tends to point people the other direction. But I think they're really missing out by not going to baby back, particularly the ones we do.
Let's talk about pork spare ribs to begin with then. I like to buy the full rack of pork spares. I don't think I've ever bought one that's already cut down into the St. Louis format.
Nope.
So, but I always cut mine down into the St. Louis format when I get them. Okay, so there's an advantage going on here, and without graphics to show you how that's cut down, if you want to learn how to do that, there are tons of videos on YouTube. If you go out there and ask YouTube how to make a St. Louis cut pork spare rib, you'll find 1,000 videos on how to do it. It's very easy to do.
It's an easy process.
And most of the time,
you save yourself money.
Yeah. In the competition world, I think most of the competition cooks are cooking pork spares that have been trimmed down to a St. Louis cut.
Yep.
The St. Louis cut makes all the ribs pretty much the same length and same shape.
And it gets rid of that tendon on the end.
The thing I like about cutting down a full rack of pork spares is I save that meat that I cut off of it and do other things with it. It's amazing as ground pork. And
sausage.
Sometimes, and the rib tips that I cut off of there, a lot of times I'll throw those on the grill with the ribs. That's kind of like the pitmaster snack.
That's right. Yeah. Just do a straight grill on them, and you can be munching while your ribs are finishing up.
Yeah. So, what do you think the most popular method for cooking a rack of pork spares in the St. Louis format is? What's the go-to method for that, Jeff?
I think probably the 3-2-1 is the go-to. I kind of modify that. I think you probably do too. I usually take mine until I like the color, get a little bit of bark on there, and then I'll wrap them. And when I wrap them, I'll put butter, brown sugar, some running-muck maple syrup in there.
Right.
And let them baste.
So when Jeff says the 3-2-1 method, what that is, that's the times. This cook is broken down into 3 segments. The first segment is 3 hours long. The second segment is 2. The third segment is 1 hour. And that is done at 225 degrees on your smoker. And that's kind of important, 225 degrees. You don't want to cook any hotter than that for the 3-2-1 method, or the ribs will turn into mush on you. But that's not entirely bad either. And that's something else I want to talk about. But the 3-2-1 method, I season my ribs in advance of the cook, just like I do everything else. It's optional. You don't have to do it, but I like to put the rub on my ribs, and I just wrap my ribs back up in saran wrap and throw them in the refrigerator overnight and put them on the next day. And that gives the salt. I feel like I'm getting a better flavor throughout the meat when I let that salt penetrate the meat overnight. It's kind of like a dry brine. In fact, it is a dry brine, but I do
And
that
speaking of
overnight.
which, some people just put the salt on them for overnight if their rub doesn't contain any salt in it. Then the
Right.
next day they put the rub on.
Yeah, you can do that. And the next morning or the next day, I'll fire up my smoker. I'll have my smoker ready to go 7 hours before I'm ready to serve ribs. Like if I want to have dinner at 6 p.m., I'll have my smoker ready to go by 11 a.m. And by 11:30 a.m., I'll drop my ribs on there because I know this process is going to take 6 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So I put my seasoned ribs on the smoker for 3 hours. I close the smoker up and just let it cruise. I don't touch it. I don't open it. I don't do anything with it during that first 3 hours. I just let it cook. And what's happening during this first 3 hours is you're putting smoke on the ribs, and they're not really cooking that much. It takes a while to cook these things. So the first 3 hours, I guess you can say, is the smoke part of the process. That's when you're
Yep.
putting the smoke on the ribs. The second segment, the 2 hour segment, after they've been on there for 3 hours, you pull them off. You what I do at that point, we're going to wrap these guys in foil for that second 2 hour segment, or that 2 hour segment, and I lay my foil out on the table. I sprinkle some brown sugar on the ribs. I drizzle, it's like Jeff said, some maple syrup on the ribs or some honey. And I like to use the squeeze margarine on there as well.
Squeeze
That's a
parquet.
squeeze parquet. Yeah, that's something that I picked up from some of the old school competition cooks like Johnny Trigg. I think Johnny Trigg, if he's even still out there, he was the first person I saw do that. And in fact, Jeff, when you and I were with Myron one time, I asked Myron if Johnny Trigg invented that, and Myron says, "Well, Trigg would like to tell you that he did."
Yeah.
So, and I don't know if they're still doing that in the competition world or not. In fact, I don't think they are, because they've come up with a lot of these fancy rib glazes now that where they don't need that. And but I put that brown sugar, maple syrup, and butter on there, and I wrap it up really tightly in foil, as tight as I can get it. And I take it back to the smoker and put it meat side down on the smoker, wrapped tightly in foil at 225 degrees for 4 hours. And what's happening during this part of the cook is we're tenderizing those ribs. The first segment we smoked it. The second segment we're gonna tenderize it.
Okay. Now, John, you just said 4 hours.
Did I say 4 hours?
Yeah, I think you meant two.
I'm sorry. The second segment is 2 hours, and we're going to tenderize it wrapped in foil for 2 hours. And then at the end of that 2 hours, we're going to take it back. What I do is I take mine back off and unwrap the ribs from the foil, drain off the liquid that's collected in the foil, and I put my ribs back on the smoker, meat side up, for this last hour. And what's happening during that last hour is we're tacking up the bark on these ribs. We're tacking up that exterior finish on the meat. During the first 30 minutes, that brown sugar that we've been steaming and braising in the foil is built up a layer on those ribs, and we want to tighten that up a little bit. And during the second 30 minutes of that final hour, I'll put salt. I'll sauce my ribs. I like a sweet Kansas City sauce, which
Yep.
I think goes really well. Some kind of sweet sauce on these ribs. Um, and I just pour some sauce across the top, and then I use my basting brush to spread that sauce out evenly, and I let that go for the last 30 minutes and let that tack up. And at that point, my ribs are done. And the question that comes up here in the online barbecue communities, a lot of people don't like this method because a lot of the backyard chefs like to mimic uh, competition methods, and this particular method is not really a competition method because it will most of the time make what we call fall off the bone ribs. And I like fall off the bone ribs. That means that those ribs are super tender. They're going to melt in your mouth, but they're not going to win you any competitions, because a competition says that rib needs to have what we call bite through texture, and it needs to not fall off the bone. They set that up. They set that up for a competition so everybody couldn't make great ribs. There's a real fine window between bite through texture and fall off the bone, and if you walk past that line, your ribs are no good for the competition. They may still taste great. They may be great to eat, but
this is another classic example of your normal backyard cook. What you cook for competition, you wouldn't cook for your friends.
Right. Yeah, and this method, you don't need a thermometer. You don't need to know what the temperature inside those ribs of the meat is. It's gonna be right. Yeah. In fact, that's something I do want to talk about later on. Is I don't use a thermometer at all when I'm cooking ribs, and we'll talk about why in a little bit. But that 3-2-1 method on pork spare ribs works really well. That same method.
Okay, let's stop for a second, John. Do you take the membrane off the back of your ribs?
That's something we should talk about. Yes. I want to tell you that I do, and then I'm going to say I don't do it all the time, and I've got a reason for not doing it. Competition cooks take the membrane off their ribs, and if you've never cooked ribs, you don't know what I'm talking about here. But when you get a rack of ribs, when you flip it over and are looking at the bone side, there is a thin silver skin membrane that covers the back of the bones, and it's a little piece of connective tissue that connected those bones to the muscle behind it. So, and it stays behind when these things are butchered. And the competition theory here is that you don't want to judge biting into that, because that piece of connective tissue is not going to render out during the cook. It's not going to turn into the gelatin and render into a liquid during the cooking process, because it's not that kind of material. And I understand that philosophy is correct, but where I think there's a breakdown in it is I have never seen a competition judge or anybody who's sitting at my dinner table take a bite off of the bone side of the rib. No. You follow me here, Jeff?
No. Yeah, absolutely. There's no meat back there.
When you pick that rib up, you're holding it. You take a bite off the bone side, you're not going to come into contact with that membrane. The other theory is, and this theory may hold water, is that the membrane keeps the seasoning from penetrating through the back side of the meat.
That's the only reason why I take it off.
I might buy that. However, if my method where I'm seasoning my ribs the night before the cook, it don't matter if it doesn't get absorbed from the back side, because it's going to get absorbed all the way into the meat from the front side. The salt is anyway. Keep that in mind. The salt is the only thing that's going to penetrate the meat. The rest of it's just going to sit on the outside. And but the membrane, I'd like to make a case for the beef ribs that we're going to talk about later of leaving the membrane on, because when my method of cooking the beef ribs does make fall off the bone ribs, but if you leave that membrane on there, a lot of times the meat will stay connected to the bone unless you cut it off. And I like that about it. And I do like to leave the membrane on the beef ribs for that very reason. And once again, if you're going to eat beef ribs by picking it up, making finger food out of it, you're not going to take a bite off that back side. You're going to take a bite off the meat side. You're never going to come into contact with that membrane. So, in my opinion, it's not something you should sweat. If you're new to cooking ribs, there's too many other things to worry about getting right than that. And there's an art to pulling the membrane off, and until you've done it after you've done it a few times, you'll learn to get it all off in one pull. And most of the time that works. But in the beginning, it can be a little frustrating to pull that membrane off. So, but yeah, So that's that's part of the prep process that I should have talked about when I talked about seasoning them in the beginning. But the 3-2-1 method also can be used in its variation for cooking baby back ribs. Some baby back ribs, not all of them, have enough meat on them that you can do the 3-2-1 method. And Jeff, I think these ones that we like to cook, you can do the 3-2-1 method.
You probably could, but I do the 2-2-1 method on those.
Right.
On the regular baby back, I do 2, 1.5, 30.
Yeah. It just takes a little bit of practice to learn where to be. And if it doesn't come out just right, you still, in the end, you're looking for that meat to be tender. And after you've experienced this enough, you'll know when the meat's tender enough and when it's done. So when I'm doing baby back ribs that are not, Jeff and I like to buy these extra meaty. Are they Swift brand or Smithfield? They're Smithfields.
Smithfield, extra meaty.
Smithfield, yeah,
from Walmart.
Smithfield. My Walmarts and Jeff's Walmarts down in Florida. I'm in North Carolina. Jeff's in Florida, and the Walmarts that Jeff and I shop at have Smithfield pork, and they have this thing called the extra meaty baby back rib. And if you go digging through the cooler, you'll find some big ones. Sometimes you'll find some that are north of 5 pounds. And if you find the 5-pounders, I highly recommend trying it one time because they're amazing. And those can handle the 3-2-1 method. There's enough meat there to handle those 3-2-1. But the typical rack of baby back ribs is closer to the 3 or 3.5 pound range, and they can't handle 6 hours. They will. The bones will fall right off of those if you cook them that long. So those I like to probably make my cook 4.5 hours total. So 2, 1.5, and 1 maybe is about where I want to end up on those.
I do 2, 1.5, and 30. They come out.
So
yeah, it all depends. Like on the amount of meat on them. I look for how much bone is exposed during the cook. When you get, I'm going to say, after you get that 1/2 inch, anything after that 1/2 inch, you're golden.
Yep. Well, that's something else that you can't rely on because I've bought lots of racks of ribs where I didn't get any pullback.
Really?
In the cook. Sometimes they won't pull back, and it just depends on the rack.
I've never had that happen.
Jeff, I've had racks of beef ribs where I get pullbacks from both directions.
Yeah, no, I have had that too.
They'll pull back. 2 of the bones will pull back one direction, and the other 2 bones will pull back the other direction. So
that makes absolutely no sense on that.
Yeah, but it happens. Sometimes it's how it works. But those 2 methods are probably the more common methods, and it takes 6 hours. And the thing I like about those is they get a good smoky flavor. They get nice and tender, and a lot of times they're fall off the bone. And don't let anybody tell you that fall off the bone ribs aren't amazing, because anybody that tells you that, they're telling you that because they would their personal preference is to cook to competition standards rather than cooking to backyard standards. So whatever, they just want to make it. They want to make it more of a challenge for them to cook, which is fine if that's what you want to do. But don't let them tell you there's something wrong with those ribs, because they're not.
Yeah, David just said that his Aldi has a Smithfield extra meaty. I've never seen them at mine, but I'm going to have to look into that.
Yeah, Aldi's different locations have different things. It's kind of hit and miss. Yep. I don't shop at Aldi, so I don't really know what they have. We've got them around here. I just don't buy from them usually.
Well, I got one just like walking distance from the house. So
right,
a lot of the produce, like particularly cauliflower and whatnot, it's I can save $1 a head on a head of cauliflower. Yep. That's
so
worth it to go to Aldi.
I want to talk about 2 more methods of cooking ribs.
Yep.
There's what you would call a hot and fast method that doesn't take 6 hours, where you can get them done inside of 3 hours.
Yep.
And that typically is done. The last time I did that, I did it at 350 degrees for an hour. in the beginning, and then 350 degrees in the foil, and for another hour, and then I took them out of the foil, sauced them, and they were good to go.
Yep.
It's a 2-hour process at 350 degrees. Now there are a lot of folks like to grill their ribs first. They like to put the raw ribs over direct flame over a grill and keep them turning and get them charred, and then take them off and let them smoke to finish. I've seen that done quite frequently. That's a common method in my area. I've got friends that do that.
Well, we also have those folks who boil their ribs first, but I'm not in that camp.
Well, I'm going to talk about that too, because I've done that. I like to call that my mama's ribs, because when I was growing up, that's what we had. The grill that we had at my house when we were growing up, Jeff, was one of these. I can't remember the brand name of it, but it was one that was bolted on a stand to the concrete, and it was wired into the house as natural gas. And that's the only grill we had. We didn't have a smoker.
Probably a char grill.
I can't remember. It was I can't. It was whatever brand the gas company sold. I don't remember the brand at the moment, but my mom would boil the ribs, and then Dad would take the ribs down to the grill and char them up after they had been tenderized in the boil.
Charm glow, that's right.
Charm glow, yeah, I think that's probably it. Because they had those ceramic briquettes on a layer that made a nice even heat diffuser in there from the gas tubes underneath, and we would periodically flip those briquettes over like you'd flip your heat deflector over in a Kamado to burn the crud off of them. But
just clean them up.
I think that was it probably, but that's how I grew up eating ribs. And several years back, I decided I was going to make a video on that, and the results I got were excellent. This is something that does upset a lot of people that consider themselves to be avid and well-versed barbecue cooks. Boiling a rib is akin to using charcoal starter fluid or something along those lines. But I made a video a while back of my boiled rib process, and I took a stock pot and put water in it. I quartered an onion. I smashed a few cloves of garlic. I put a little hot sauce in there. I put some barbecue rub in it. I think I put some black peppercorns in there. You can put anything you want. And I put salt in it. I put salt in it as well, because I wanted them to get salt during this process. It's kind of like a hot wet brine to get them salted up. And I put all the ribs in there. I cut the ribs into individual bones for this process, dropped them in there and put the lid on it, and turn the heat back to a simmer. We're not actually I wouldn't call it a boil, but it was a simmer, a very low simmer, just to where you've got little bubbles coming up around the outer edge of the pot. You don't need to boil. You don't want to boil these things hard. You want to keep that water probably, I'm guessing it's in the 195 degree range or so when it's on that slow simmer like that. But an hour to an hour and 15 minutes, maybe an hour and a half, they're done. So what I did then was I took them out and I fired up the Joe, and I tried it 2 different ways. I tried some of it over, I sauced them. I put sauce on them at this point. So the next target is to put them on over. I like to use elevated direct heat, and you keep them turning and char up the outside of that and char up some of that sauce. And they were delicious. They were absolutely delicious. They're not competition ribs. They're not the same kind of ribs that we were talking about earlier. They don't have any smoke flavor because they're not smoked.
Have you ever made Quincy Jones ribs?
I'm not sure what those are.
That's where you start off with an aluminum pan. You put down onions in the bottom. Throw your onions and pepper. Throw 2 racks of ribs down. more onions and peppers, another 2 racks of baby back ribs, more onions and peppers, another 2 racks of baby back ribs.
Right.
Put them in the refrigerator overnight. Next day, throw them in the oven. They're pretty good, but they just don't have any smoke flavor to them.
Right. That sounds interesting.
And they come out with a really nice flavor, but like I say, no smoke. I modified it once. I took and put them on the smoker for about an hour and then layered them in. Those came out really good.
Right. So Andrew in the comments here said he likes ribs on the rotisserie, which is the Kamado Joe rotisserie. I've played with that concept before, and our friend Jarrell loves to do that too. That's his go-to method. But I have yet to be what I would call successful at that. I've never been able to get ribs tender enough to suit me on the rotisserie over direct flame.
I don't think you're going to get a fall off the bone rib on the rotisserie. I could be wrong. Andrew may be able to enlighten us on that.
I've just not been successful.
I think you're going to get the tug.
Yeah. So that might work. I've tried it 5 or 6 times, and I've never been happy with the results I've gotten. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong or what. Because one of the things I pride myself on being able to do is feel the meat or use a temperature probe or a toothpick to feel how tender that meat is. And I am never getting to the tenderness level that I like when I'm cooking those things on the rotisserie.
Well, I say the bad thing about cooking on the rotisserie, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, is you're maxed out at 2 racks of ribs on the rotisserie. And usually when I cook ribs, I'll cook probably 4 slabs of ribs.
Right. Ryan's mentioned braising ribs, and Ryan says it may sound crazy, but ribs braised in an aluminum pan with root beer and a little cherry smoke.
I bet it is good.
Yeah. And
you can substitute the root beer for cherry Coke.
Yeah, you can put any kind of liquid you want in there. And when we get around to talking beef ribs, part of my favorite process, and I don't do pork spares that way or baby backs because I'm not breaking them down, but I like to I pretty much like to cook my beef ribs as individual bones. I can do it either way, but there are a lot of methods to cook pork ribs, and I think they're all good, and it's all going to boil down to what your preference is or how much time you want to spend on it. But the 3-2-1 method for me is a pretty foolproof method that makes a beautifully edible result in the end. They may or may not fall off the bone for you, but they're going to be close to it. I think I pretty much get fall off the bone every time I try it. Now, that being the case, let me mention one other concept here, especially with the St. Louis cut. The St. Louis cut's nice and rectangular and the same width all the way down the rack. One of the things I did one time that was a lot of fun is I had a big loaf of French bread, and I made a homemade rib sandwich with a rack.
Did you make a McRib?
Yes. Well, it was a man cave version of a McRib.
Absolutely. That's good.
I took that rack of pork spare ribs that were St. Louis cut, and I did cook them to fall off the bone tenderness. And I pulled all the bones out of it, and I set that rack of ribs on my sandwich bread. And then I made a bacon jam to go on it, and it was crazy. It was absolutely
jam,
amazing.
and then throw some pickles on there, so you get
then
you
take that,
you just slice saltiness, and
you slice that thing into slices, and it's enough to serve 10 people at least. A nice sandwich. And you could put whatever you want on there. You could make it a lot like a McDonald's McRib sandwich with the barbecue sauce and the pickles, or they use onions on theirs that are uncooked.
Onion and pickle.
Yeah, I like the McRib sandwich. I hate that they don't have. I would stop at McDonald's more if they had that all the time, because I don't like most of their burgers and whatnot. But
I don't know why they quit doing it all the time. I mean, to me, it seemed like. I mean, that's
it's
the
a
only
cult
thing I got from
favorite. Yeah, it's a cult favorite for sure. But and I don't know what those ribs are made out of. They're pressed into a mold, some kind of meat. And in fact, if you can go online and search these things out too, you can buy these molds.
To do it, yeah.
People originally were printing those things with 3D printers where you could mold your own McRib. I guess out of ground rib meat or something. I don't know what kind of meat they were using, but
Probably.
it made that shape of the patty that you get from McDonald's for the McRib. And I know those are out there. I've seen them. I've never owned one, but that's doable.
And
So,
Janet says, and use meat glue.
yeah, I don't know that you
Yeah,
need
Janice,
meat glue
meat
for
glue.
that. I don't know how it works because I never really investigated it, but
I
it
think they're
was,
just doing a real fine grind and then doing a press into a mold,
yeah.
freezing it.
So that pretty much covers the basic side of cooking pork ribs. They're not hard to do and they're delicious, and you just make some nice sides to go with it, like macaroni and cheese or barbecue baked beans or coleslaw or uh, whatever your favorite barbecue sides are. There's a lot of good stuff out there,
Yep.
and the ribs, they're always easy to find. But beef ribs, let's talk about the beef ribs a bit.
Okay, let's start this off here right. I just picked some up from Costco, John. Tell you how big these things were. I had to cut them down into 2 rib sections to put them in the vacuum seal bags. That's how big they
Yeah,
were.
are they plate?
Yeah, they're plate, but man,
4-bone plates?
I happened to look at the rack and it was like beautiful, thick ribs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How much did the rack weigh?
I got the package. It was 20 pounds and it was $116.
Is that one rack?
Well, it's four 4-bone sections.
4. Okay, so they're about 5 pounds a piece.
Yep.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah, that's fine. That's the size I like to cook. That's the typical chuck short ribs that I get. I don't have Costco available to me, but my Publix will sell those to me if I catch them on the right day. When they've got them that they haven't cut down for the meat case yet, they're the 4-bone racks, and they make me buy 2 of them. I've never had to buy 4, but they're usually 4 to 5 pounds a piece, and there's 2 of them in the package. So those are great. Those are excellent. And when I first started getting them, they were $5.99 a pound, and I think they're twice that now.
It was $5.99 a pound is what I paid for
$5.99 at Costco.
That's why I got them. They look
Can't
good.
beat that.
The freezer was full. Brought them home. Guess you bought more meat. I go, well,
Yeah.
it was on sale.
Beef ribs cost more than pork ribs do.
Oh, absolutely. But I'll eat them any day over pork ribs.
Yep. So the beef ribs, my prep process is the same. I season them ahead of time, and I've gotten to the point where I do leave the membrane on the beef ribs. I don't even bother taking those off because that does help keep them together. And my process tends to make them want to fall off the bone, but they hang on there well when I leave that membrane intact. So
Andrew says he seasons his 24 hours in advance. That's what I do.
Yeah, 24 is great. I wouldn't go a whole lot longer than that because salt not only flavors, but it tenderizes, and too long can be a bad thing. I wouldn't go longer than 24. I have gone longer, but I don't do it intentionally.
No.
24 is a good spot, and I normally go about 12. I'll normally season mine 12 to 14 hours before they're going to go on the smoker. But
mine usually aren't 24. I usually season them at night to put them on the next day around.
That's what I
9
do.
o'clock. So we're probably talking 12, 15 hour season on them.
My cook process on the beef ribs is going to take 7 to 8 hours in most cases at 250. Well, yeah, the larger racks, maybe you could get them in 6. I could see where some of them would be done in 6. But
I usually bump the time. When I go into my braising mode, I usually bump the temperature up.
Oh, I do too. So I can get a little bit of a simmer going in the braise. I usually take the smoker to 325 at that stage, but I'm cooking at 250 for the first 4 hours, 3 to 4 hours in the smoke at 250. And once again, I'm not using the temperature. And my beef ribs, one of the things I do after they've been on there for 2 hours is I like to spritz mine with a little bit of water about every 30 minutes for the next 2 hours. And the only
I think it
reason
helps
I
the
do,
bark.
well, I think it does, but it also it helps make a beautiful smoke ring. And it's just aesthetic, you know. Smoke rings don't change much, but the appearance. But you can watch these beef ribs get a smoke ring because you can watch that meat color start to turn red as it cooks underneath your rub and whatnot. But 3 to 4 hours in the smoke, and uh, I've got two different ways I go after that part. I'll either wrap them in foil, but most of the time I want to braise those. I want to finish those. If I'm cooking the 4 bone rack and I haven't cut it into individual bones, I will put it in an aluminum foil pan. I'll put in a 50-50 mix of beef stock and Guinness beer, and I'll cut up an onion. I'll cut up some green bell pepper. Or what I've recently come upon is I've quit using the green bell pepper and started using poblanos. That makes an amazing flavor in there as opposed to the green bell pepper. I put a little garlic in it, and that'll become my braising liquid. Now I cover the pan with foil, and I run the smoker temperature up to 325, where I can get a little bubbling going on in that braising liquid. And that usually takes, if I've been going for 4 hours or 4.5 hours, that next stage there takes 2 or 2.5 hours, maybe 3, depending on how thick the ribs are, to get them to where they're just super tender.
Super tender. Oh man,
When I've
makes the tongue hard.
Yeah, when I've gotten to the point where I know that I'm real close to that super tender point, I will mix up a cornstarch slurry and dump it in my braising liquid to thicken that braising liquid up a little bit. And I use that braising liquid that's been thickened up as a sauce because I like to serve those beef ribs over. My favorite thing to serve them over is the stone ground grits.
Yep.
A lot of people like to serve them over mashed potatoes, though. And either way, that braising liquid, if you put a little cornstarch slurry in there to thicken that up a little bit where it's not runny, where it'll actually adhere to the meat, it makes a beautiful sauce to spoon on there after you set that on top of a pile of grits or a pile of mashed potatoes. It's really good. And
David asked, "What's your favorite beef rub is?" And I'll tell you what mine is after you say yours.
Well, I'm making my own pretty much. I'll have to, if you go to the Man Cave Meals Facebook page and search for the hashtag Man Cave Magic, you'll find my all-purpose rub, my pork rub, and my beef rub recipes with that hashtag. And I'll try to repost them again here at some point because I have actually tweaked those recently. But my beef rub basically is a salt, pepper, garlic rub, and to that, well, mine's got MSG in it, which a lot of people don't want to do that either. But I put ground coriander, ground cumin, and a little bit of paprika in there as well. And if I'm in the mood for it, I'll put a little cayenne in it as well. That's what goes on mine.
Goes on mine is salt, pepper, garlic, or Lane's brisket rub,
right?
Which is salt, pepper, garlic, and that's all the seasoning they need.
Yeah,
they come out amazing.
But I like.
I'm like you. I do the same braising. The only difference is I don't do the Guinness. I just do the better and bouillon. Make that up. So that at the bottom with some onions and green pepper. Cover it in the aluminum pan. Let her go and.
Yeah, I don't use the better than bouillon on these.
Do the yellow grits.
Yeah,
I like to do the yellow grits on my beef ribs.
I actually use reduced sodium. beef broth than that, come to think of it, because I've got a lot of salt on the ribs already. But I don't know that it would make that much difference. But the better than
I buy the
bouillon,
better than bouillon reduced sodium.
right? So you gotta be careful with. You don't want to add a lot of salt to that if you've salted it to begin with. But these beef ribs, they're amazing. It's like
Heaven.
a lot of people want to call it brisket on a stick, and I don't want to call it that. I want to call it ribeye on a stick, because I think it tastes a lot better. It doesn't taste like ribeye, but it tastes a lot better than brisket. It doesn't taste like brisket at all to me. And so, and another thing, folks,
I don't like compare it to brisket on a stick. It's a rib on a stick.
right?
There's no flavor. I mean, you and I are in complete agreement. The best part of the cow, if you do your beef ribs right, anybody who says that's not the best part of the cow, I don't know what to tell them.
Well,
I mean, that's the best part of the cow. That it melts in your mouth. I mean, you can take it, cut it off the bone, cut it into chunks, put it over your grits, over your mashed potatoes. I mean, it's
you can chop it. You can chop it and make beef sandwiches with it. There's
absolutely.
To me, it's a little bit of an overkill for taco, but you could do that.
You could take it right off the bone and leave it in one piece and put it on a hoagie roll. And
yeah, the possibilities, guys, are unlimited with ribs. It's one of these things that what you do if you don't have to serve it on the bone on the plate, but that's the traditional way. That's what most people do.
Like I say, I love them over the yellow grits with the au jus thickened up with the cornstarch soy.
Yep.
That's man.
But when you've got leftover, if you've got leftover, cut the leftover rib meat off the bone and chop it and use it in a quesadilla. Use it have it for breakfast with some scrambled eggs or some fried eggs.
I've done that. I made an omelet with beef ribs. Oh, let me tell you what.
Take some of that chopped beef rib meat and put it down in a skillet or on your griddle and just sear it off a little bit and a little bit of butter, and then put your egg on top of it. And there's all kinds of stuff.
Making me hungry, John. Making me hungry, buddy.
There's no shortage of things you can do with leftovers when it comes to rib meat. And one of the things, when we talked about accessories, was it last week we talked about the really right accessories?
Yep.
If you've got a vacuum sealer, you can vacuum seal those ribs and throw them in the freezer and reheat them with your sous vide circulator, and they're really good the second time around.
They're just as fresh, reheated, in the water bath, sous vide bath, whichever. They're just as good as if they came off the grill. There's no degradation, in my opinion.
Everything's punching good there. And David says a sandwich with horseradish sauce. That'd be fine.
English horseradish.
All kinds of sauces are going to go well on that. And that's something we need to talk about in a future podcast is sauces, because in fact, you know how I like to tweak people by talking about steak sauces.
Yeah.
Well, I think every serious barbecue cook needs to have about 4 or 5 or maybe 6 incredible multi-purpose sauces in their arsenal to use for several things. And we ought to talk about the comeback sauces. I finally got my comeback sauce the way I like it, and it goes good on so many things. It goes good on sandwiches, burgers, hot dogs, as a French fried dip. There's just so many things you can do with my comeback sauce, and you make it what you want it to be. Yeah, you make it what you want it to be, but you don't share the recipe with your friends. That's one of the things that makes them want to come to your place to get barbecue instead of having you come to theirs. And but the comeback sauce, we can talk about sauces. One of the things I want to talk about here occasionally is some recipes, so we'll be thinking about that. But I think we're going to wrap that up tonight. I think we've covered a lot of good things about rib methods. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments.
Let me scroll through the questions here real quick and see if we covered them all. I tried to keep up with them as we were going.
I don't have my executive producer on duty tonight. Tanya is busy with some other things, so I'm not able to keep up with the questions while we're doing this.
Thinking we got them all. The only one is, I think Janice asked how long on the ribs, and it was a 6-hour total on the 321. Janice,
is that that's the pork ribs? Yeah.
Right. Oh, what temperature are you cruising those ribs at for 6 hours? 225, Janice.
Yeah, 225 is critical there. 250 is too much actually for 6 hours. If you cook at 250, I'd probably cut 15 minutes off of each stage.
Yep.
So hopefully next week we should have Tanya back to help us keep up with the questions that are being asked, because my wife teaches, and this is the last semester of the college semester, and she's wrapping things up. She's busy tonight with that. So anyway, guys, the No Bandit wants to know if I'm familiar with this Nomad Camp Grill. Nope, it's not something I'm familiar with. I don't think. Chances are I may have seen it, but I don't recognize it by the name. Jeff, are you familiar with this? Is that the one that looks like a little suitcase?
Hang on a second. I'm going to look it up. I think I may have seen it.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with I don't think I've heard of this one. Bandit says, yeah, it's like a little suitcase. So I think I have seen it. No, I'm not. I've only seen pictures of it.
Oh, yes, John.
So it's a little it's a little portable. A portable
chart. Hang on.
Yeah, I don't remember.
It's those. It looks like a briefcase. They go for $6.95. Now for $6.95, I'll tell you what, I'd buy a PK Go all day long, every day.
My favorite portable charcoal grill is either going to be, if it's something I want to take with me and I'm not going to be cooking for a crowd, I like the Weber PK Go, or not the Weber Go Anywhere, or the Weber Jumbo Joe. The Weber Jumbo Joe is actually a nice lightweight portable 18-inch diameter charcoal grill, and that it's like $70. That would be one I would want. There's no way I can see myself spending that much money on a portable grill that I'm not going to use that often. But it's cool. Yeah, it is.
PK Go is my go-to for a portable.
Yeah, and I've got the PK Go. I just haven't cooked on mine in a long time. It's good, but it's heavy. It's a little heavy compared to.
I bought my friend one for his RV. He loves it. He does low and slow smokes on it. Everything. He's got that thing tuned in right. What about the slot dog? It's the next best thing.
It's the next big thing.
Next big thing. That's right.
Yeah. Mine, I love my slot dog. That's guys. What we're talking about here is the slot dog is a tool that cuts cross hatches in your hot dog, and it's the only way to cook hot dogs. They're $20 on Amazon. So
yeah, but John, your slot dog directions didn't include a very important item.
What's that?
On ours that Hickey gave me, number 1, do not insert body parts.
Yeah, well, that one's not a slot dog. See, slot dog owners are more refined than that. They don't need that instruction. They know better. So, all right. Well, guys, I appreciate you hanging out with us. Thanks for coming, and we'll be back next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Thanks for joining in on this week's episode of the Man Cave Meals podcast. If you would like to see additional content that I publish each week, be sure to follow along the Man Cave Meals Facebook page and the Man Cave Meals YouTube channel. If you would like to become a sponsor of this podcast, please feel free to contact me directly through the Man Cave Meals Facebook page. Until next week, everybody enjoy your cooking.